friends, welcome to thctrust.org. Today we're going to do a really brief overview of personal status correction slash secured party creditor. And specifically we're going to look at what I think is probably, it's a recent addition. It's long overdue. Many years I've been wanting to get this thing right, and now we finally got it right. And I'm going to go over what I think is one of the most significant steps or documents or things that one must do when it comes to personal status correction. This is at the core of everything. Now, earlier I said the term secured party creditor. I said that for a reason, so that I can tell you THC Trust's position on secured party creditor. It's been more than 5 years, I would say. Probably, it's definitely been more than 5 years since we did any secured party creditor filings, because to be honest with you, as I've studied more in my and as I've evolved in this field of study, I just have to be honest with myself and the members of thctrust.org. At this point, I see no benefit in secured party creditor filings. And I'm saying this, I'm not talking about UCCs. I'm not saying that there's no benefit for filing UCCs. But generally what is taught with the secured party creditor, sending the bond to the Treasury with the chargeback order and all of these different things, I think that one, it's outdated technology that probably did work at some point or probably never did work. But I don't think that any of the things in secured party creditor accurately and precisely address the core of what we are dealing with in commerce, right? It's very limited. And again, there may be a reason. I mean, in our personal status correction steps, I dedicate a section to the UCC. I don't think it's going to get you out of any court situation. It's not going to make them look at you different in a criminal proceeding, because it doesn't have the purpose of doing these things, and it just doesn't, it doesn't tie in like that. That's my personal opinion. So we don't do secured party creditor, per se. And if you ask me about it, I'm going to talk to you about personal status correction, because that's what we do. And personal status correction is a lot less work. It's more precise, and it's much easier for you to understand, because you can understand, why you're recording a last will and testamentary trust, why you are executing a revocable trust, right? Why you use a certificate of trust, why you're executing a trade name, which is what we're going to talk about today. So let's, first things first, go to www.thctrust.org. And when you get here, do you see the mouse on the screen right here? Click right down here and create an account. And once you have an account, go ahead and log right in. And then once you log in, click up here where it says membership plan. And once you get the membership plan, I prefer you get the yearly membership plan. Give me 24 to 48 hours so I can update your permissions and give you full access to the website. It's not going to be instant, but I am going to get the notification. And if you want to make it happen even faster, then send me a text message and say, hey, I just did the membership subscription, and only do that for the $225. If you do the $32 per month, let me go in there and find it. But if you do the $225 yearly subscription, you send me the text, I will make it happen faster, right? Just because I know you're going to be eager and excited about going in there and doing what you got to do. So once you do that, come down here, and even if you don't do that, what we're talking about today, you can follow along because it's under the basic topics. But even though we're talking about trademarks under the basic topics, it is a part of, as I was stating earlier, our personal status correction that's under the advanced topics. So let's go under the personal status correction, advanced topics, and we will see here, I have this thing broken down into steps, although it's only like 5 or 6 steps, so you don't necessarily have to do these things in order, but you should do them in order. And I say not necessarily because, there's some things that you probably can do before other things. But if you see here, we start with name correction. I'm not going to go into that. There's steps there. And I'm not going to go into it in this video, but I will say, just to bring things in context, everything that I'm doing is not for people to just follow blindly like sheeple. I'm creating a guide for you to follow and to think. The name correction is really for Moorish Americans like myself. And it doesn't mean that you have to do that. Many Moors will say you don't correct you don't it's improper to correct your name by going to court and getting a court order. I chose to get a court order because it made it a lot easier for everything I was trying to overall accomplish, right? If I'm trying to have something displayed on my passport, I can give them all types of documents and arguments about why I don't have to get a court order name change. But for me, I'm dealing with just the prima facie evidence of what they see when they read my name. If they don't see if they don't see my title, my appellation, then it's not there. So I'm stating all that to say I'm not the authority on any of this. But for me, the quickest way to get that name corrected on any government ID is to get a court order. So I got a court order to add L, and some people have got court orders to add Bay to their names. Now, when you get this court order, it's like an identity document within itself. It's just like a passport. It's just like a, whatever. So I wouldn't say that now that you got this court order, you run around and you start updating IDs. You don't have to update any ID until your particular commerce requires it. Don't just go doing stuff to just do stuff, right? And again, I definitely wouldn't update my birth certificate. I definitely would not change the name on the birth certificate, right? So you're creating, the separation already exists, but when you do the name correction, what I like to do is, because I know sometimes I have to operate in the capacity of being the trustee, I the name correction that I want on my ID is the same ID that's going to operate in the public from time to time as a trustee. For example, if I'm opening up a trust account for, let's say, a revocable trust, and I want to be the trustee, I want my IDs not to say the same thing on my birth certificate. When they are putting who's the trustee on the account, I want that to line up with what's on my ID. Enough said about that. Then we talk about address correction. This isn't a personal status correction video, so I'm not really going in on these things. But to be brief about it, if you're a private entity, you don't want to be using a residential address, because your proper name at a residential address are the components of identification, right? And you look at your driver's license, your ID card, it has your name and your residence and your address. So residence is domestic. So you can't receive mail in your proper name at a residential address without creating a record of presumption that you are a citizen, right? And as the trustee for your estate, you don't want to be a citizen. So you should always receive mail at a private address through agency, because it doesn't create the presumption that you're a citizen. So it's about the address. Is it a residential address? Even if it's a business address, is it a domestic address, or is it a private address, like a private mailbox? So that's what you have to look up there. Then, once we get our name corrected and, the address corrected, so now we have a permanent place to do communications and correspondence, and we never, ever, ever receive mail in the public again. I'll take you one step further that I didn't write on here yet. You may also want to purchase your telephone number. You can purchase your custom telephone number for like $150, and then you can port it to any AT&T, Verizon, any carrier that you would like, or you can just use it with the digital carrier, like use it online or something like that. It's a difference when you purchase and you own the rights to your own telephone number, right? I can tell you guys a story, but it's not even worth telling. But yeah, so that's another level of privacy. So you'll put all of that in step one, correcting your name, your address, your telephone number. And I will tell you, because we don't have the time to say all of this in this video, it does wonders for your well-being, for your life, for just, when you talk about bills and creditors and courts and people who want to involve you and solicit and just suck you into a contract. A lot of that happens because you're deemed to be a resident, a citizen using a public address. A lot of that stuff will change and cease, even with your telephone number. That address and your telephone number, if you make those things private, it's going to keep you out of commerce until you want to be in commerce. And that's important. So once all that's done, then the first thing we're really doing to correct our status or to set up our affairs is to record a last will and testamentary trust. Or some people, you can say a last will and testament. But a will is a trust, especially depending on how you set it up. So in the earlier evolutions of personal status correction, I was doing what was referred to as the pour over will, which the purpose of the pour over will, you could Google it and look it up, is to, when one passes form, is to any assets that remain outside of their revocable trust when they pass form, that will only says to pour that asset over into the trust, right? So we're not doing the pour over will right now. We're just doing the last will and testamentary trust, which is our estate document, the document that lays out how the testator wants to set up his estate. And in that document, we, from the last will and testamentary trust arises a certain revocable trust or living trust. And it is a very normal thing for people to designate or to establish trusts in their last will and testament, right? And they may establish trust because they want to put a particular piece of property in trust so that it can be managed in trust after they pass form. What we are doing is, through our last will and testamentary trust, we're giving a rise to the, whatever private banking trust. That's just the name, right? But really, it's just the living trust that's going to control the estate, right? So in that last will and testamentary trust, we state all the things that need to be stated, right? If we had, how we want to be buried, all of those type of details. But then when it comes to the property, we, in real time and now time, immediately convey all of the property, known and unknown. But we want to be as specific as possible, meaning have a fee schedule. And in that last will and testamentary trust, convey all the property into the private banking trust and designate the trustees of the private banking trust. All this happens in the last will and testament, right? And all the property is conveyed into the private banking trust. And then under your last will and testament, you have personal representatives. You have an executor. If you've studied, you know about the office of the executor. Well, if you look in the Uniform Trust Code, and there's other references that would tell you, a last will and testamentary trust, or a will, is a trust instrument. Your executor for your estate is a trustee. But what we do is, since we've established this banking trust, which is our living trust, really, since this has been established in our will and the property has been conveyed to it, we have also established in our will that our executors are also appointed duly as the trustees for the trust. So basically, the interesting thing about this, right, if anybody knows how a will operates, the will gets deposited with the county or in some place, and you get a safekeeping's receipt from it, or a certificate of deposit. They're going to give you some type of receipt for it. And then it's kind of like a private document. Even though it's a trust, it's not really a revocable trust. If you're going to change anything with the will, you have to do a codicil. So it's kind of like revocable, but it basically means you can't just revoke it with an instrument. You have to replace it or update the will that's on file. And you got the safekeeping's receipt or the certificate of deposit, so you can do that. But the interesting thing is, now that that's done and out the way, that's kind of step two, right? Last will and testamentary trust. Now we come down to step 3, the certificate of trust. So now we're not in the probate, we're dealing with the estate, but we're dealing with the living trust now, the living estate, right? If somebody asks for your trust instrument, you don't necessarily have to show them that because it's private. It's about your discretion. But just be aware, you might not be able to get a piece of business done because you refuse to show them your trust. So don't be so hung up that the rules say I can't show them the trust, so I'm not going to do it, and then you can't figure out how to get past a certain thing. So this is why this is a thinking man's game. And this is why there's a certification of trust, because, and I won't say all places, but the majority of places where your trust instrument is required to do business, or where there's required to be evidence of a trust, or where you want there to be evidence of a trust, a certification of trust is sufficient. Now, you can't just use any certification of trust because every state and every bank that's in a state has certain requisites that they have to see in that certification of trust. And if you just Google certification of trust, state of whatever, and start looking for those codes, it's going to be very clear about what they want to see or what they require to see in a certification of trust. So we may have templates and things on the site, but just make sure that you're looking and you're including everything in there. Now, why is this important? Because we've already set up everything. It's in the last will and testamentary trust, right? And out of that will arises the private banking trust, which is, again, it's just the name. It's really your living trust, right? You may call it different things. Those are specifics that get into the documents or how you do business. And but that private banking trust, or let's just say the trust, because there's two things and we can't really get into them all. The private banking trust is just for the individual banker himself. But then you have the foreign situs trust, the 98 series. And it doesn't have to be a 98 series, but basically the foreign separate state from the estate, right? The trust that arises out of the last will and testamentary trust is a living trust that is supposed to control the estate. So you might need to get a tax ID number for it, right? So when you have the tax ID number for a trust, you know who the trustee is, who all the parties is. You can usually issue a certification of trust to do business. You can issue the certification of trust and bring your tax ID number to open the bank account. And some places they may say, oh, no, we need to see the original trust instrument. And so that's the purpose of the certification of trust. There's going to be various places where you use it. Say, for example, you had a court matter. And like many of us are beginning to understand, a lot of our remedies are in equity. So to be in equity, you have to be operating in the trust in some capacity, beneficiary, trustee. But instead of arguing the existence of a trust, a certification of trust proves the existence of the trust. And through that certification, you can state all the facts that needed to be stated because these certificates are to be given credit in equity, right? So the certification of trust is, well, you see, I hope you see, that's the purpose of it. Because you may have trust instruments, a revocable trust instrument. It's revocable. It means it can change at any time. Or you may have a irrevocable trust instrument like a business trust or whatever. But wherever you don't want to display those original instruments, you can use a certification of trust to only show the necessary information for the required business at hand. Down at the bottom here, I have different state codes: the Georgia code, New Jersey code, Texas code, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Ohio, California. So you could just look down there and it'll tell you exactly what needs to be in a certification of trust for those states. And now I'm on to what I was going to talk about today, which is the other recordings and affidavits. Most of this is just going to only solely be for intellectual property rights, things that deal with the person. Declarations of nationalities, maybe that you have published in the newspaper. Copyright and trademark claims.